Good afternoon and welcome, Ryan Willard here with the Thinking Hand Studio, and today I'm answering the question, how much does an extension cost? And I'm sitting here with my good friend Hylton. Hylton, welcome.
Welcome. Hi.
Good to have you. And Hylton is a contractor with a lot of experience working on residential and domestic jobs. He's got a very deep understanding of party wall compliance and also removing of structural elements like chimneys. So very lucky to have Hylton here with us today. And I'm going to be asking Hylton a little bit to go into depth about how he prices jobs and how cost overruns can occur when working on these types of small domestic projects. So brilliant. So just to get started, Hylton, I just want to ask you a little bit about your company, what it is that you do and your experience, and tell us a little bit about that, and then we can kind of move on to talking about the costing projects.
Okay, cool. My name's Hylton. I run a company called Hylton Construction. We tend to have clients who come to us mostly through the internet or referrals, and they have situations in their properties where they want to create space and more value. I tend to focus on space. A lot of my past clients have removed chimney breasts, chimney stacks to create space in their rooms. We find that a lot chimneys are no longer in use. We've now branched into more loft conversions and extensions as well, so we do a full package of space creation in domestic properties.
Great. And how long have you been going for?
I started out as a carpenter. I've been in the building industry about 32 years, so I've done a variety of
so you know
from
shit.
building. I don't know about know my shit. I'm still learning actually, but at the same time, experience is your wisdom, and I think in the past I've made lots of mistakes, and I find it's the mistakes which drives you to correct. And now we've got a really happy medium of a quite successful business going forward. So.
Excellent. Oh, very exciting. So for you, me as an architect, when I work with a client, and the first thing on a client's mind is how much is this project going to cost? And it's very difficult for me to be able to say that, because I've done a extension, for example, of around 12 square meters, and I've designed them where they've cost £40,000.
Yes.
And I've also worked on the same sort of scale, but it's cost £110,000 because the level of finish and the detailing, and we were using bits of structural glass and things like that, and it was a very different kind of one was in one part of town and one was in another part of town, and there's very different needs from different clients.
Yes.
And so I often, when I start out a project, I'll use a very rough kind of square meterage, and I'll say, at a lower end of the scale, perhaps £1,500 per square meter for a new build, and then £2,000 for kind of more mid-range, and then £2,500 and above, you're starting getting into the kind of realms of the high-end and luxury services.
Yes.
But that's a very approximate way of gauging things, and that's only really pricing projects in terms of their construction costs and the labour that's involved. It doesn't include all the costs to the client in terms of like architect's fees, engineering fees, VAT that gets put on top of that. So I'm really interested in what it's like from your perspective. How do you price jobs? Because it's different to the way that I would talk about price, and really to go into a little bit of detail about what works for you, what kind of information do you need, and what really doesn't work.
Yes, that's a good question, Brian. Over the past years, I've become better and better at pricing.
Yeah.
Simply because a lot of the times, contractors or builders or even what we call self-employed workers, they would actually work on a rate which they're comfortable with. And it may be that you're not making any money, but you're comfortably happy charging that amount.
Right.
It depends on the perspective of the individual and how they form their company. Some companies charge and they focus on the high end market, and some people support the domestic market, and they do a lot of extensions, renovations, and things. I think your network is very, very important. The people you have around you. A lot of the times, I would call a carpenter or a bricklayer and ask them what they would charge to do this particular job.
Right.
So you more or less got the end result before you start it. You
Yeah.
begin with the end in mind. So if you do get the project, you can then say, okay, you said you're going to do it for this amount, come in and do it. So you're always then making a good living from it.
Yeah.
And it's also dependent on the clients themselves. I tend to do a lot now of connecting with clients. I tend to spend a lot of time getting to know them, asking them questions, what their quality they're expecting, build that relationship with them, and then I get my team to you could say, execute the work. And that tends to be work really well as I'm getting better and better at it. And I hope that answers some of it.
Yeah. So when a project comes to you, what's the first step that you would do in terms of like working out how much does this cost? So say for example, I've got a project and we've just gone through planning, and I've got a set of planning drawings, and I often will say to my clients that that's really not enough information to give to a contractor like yourself to price a job from. Because literally planning drawings are for planning, they're not for tendering.
Yeah.
They're only really giving us an indication of how big a project is and perhaps the materials of a project.
Yes.
So let's say I did give you a set of planning drawings. What would be the risks involved in doing that from a client's perspective, and how would you go about trying to price a job like that?
That's a good question again. I think costs, fixed costs is always more or less the same. We use different forms of way of pricing nowadays, where there's things like softwares which you can buy or go on a monthly prescription using these softwares,
Right.
which calculates all the fixed costs, as in the cement and timber and all these different things. So I think a lot the way how things are going now, it becomes very computerized.
Yeah.
So you kind of know generally how much the materials are going to cost before you start the work.
Yeah.
So you getting that information, and then it depends on things like the building control. It depends on different forms of relationships with the client, what they actually wanting, what the actual quality, what they're wanting at the end of it. I think those are the main things, because it's pointless fitting or creating something which the client doesn't want. I think especially these times where it's a very busy time for a lot of contractors and builders, and a lot of people work at different rates, and some are wanting to get really wealthy in the building industry, and some just a lot of builders just want a beer and a piss up down the pub at the end of the week. That's what they're more or less interested in. So it varies, and I think the relationship with those kind of contractors is very important, really. Yeah.
And so when you're saying that there's a lot of kind of computerization that goes in, bits of software that you can use to help you price a job.
Yes.
So what causes mistakes? What causes project overruns? Where is the risk for the client?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think I find a lot of contractors, if I'm speaking about myself, are very, as a carpenter, I'm very good at doing the carpentry work. But the opposite side of that is the paperwork, the figures, your numbers. all these things. And you've heard of left brain, right brain, where you tend to find a lot of trade people are more right brain, and they're very good at their trade. But when it comes to the figures, they would naturally
Shy
away from that. For instance, I have a brother of mine who's a really good bricklayer. Some of the things he's done in the past, but the opposite side of that, a lot of the times he doesn't know whether he's making money, he's making a living from it. That's the, so when you have a builder or a contractor who's got both sides of that, they can then really make a good living and make a good get better clients, and it stops a lot of the mistakes, because you tend to know, for instance, if the client said to do the job for his budget and it's not possible to do it for that, a contractor who's got both sides of that would shy away from it and say it's not worth it.
Yes.
That would be a bad relationship before it starts.
Yeah.
So I find that is very important. And in my experience as well going forward, we, as business people, we don't get taught. There's nothing, especially in the UK, you can literally come off the underground and put an advert in the paper saying that you're a contractor or you're a builder, and the next day you're getting clients. Now, in some countries, you need a builder's license, or you go through training, and you've got that the difference between the two, where you naturally have got to be good before you get these clients. And I think that is one of the things in the UK which could be improved on, especially when I was growing up. We had the apprenticeship, and we had things what we I think it was 3 years to be a carpenter and things like that. So you know a lot of the skill set before you actually start going into the clients.
That's very interesting, because it's, you kind of opened up something there about as a client, and if you go in there and you like, I want this price, and a builder will agree to that, there's all sorts of risks involved in that from the client side, because they don't know what kind of, there isn't a way really for them to know what kind of builder that they've just approached.
Yes.
And perhaps a more savvy, intelligent builder who's got the right business systems in place would be able to say, be quite upfront and say no to a project that doesn't work, because they know that they can't deliver it for that kind of.
Absolutely.
And this is often something I see a lot is builders will give a certain quote for, I've gone to tender on products before, and we've got 3 tenders back, and they are wildly different.
Yes.
And it's kind of a bit of a head scratcher, and you're like, well, I wouldn't go for the lower one because something doesn't smell right about that. I'm not sure if that contractor has done their due diligence. I'm not sure if they've just cut and paste from another project. They've understood, or they've gone through all the information. And with the more expensive one, I would kind of tend to lean towards it sometimes, because it looks like they've given me a more thorough breakdown of what's involved.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's what I find, the experience of that. Eventually, the good contractor would eventually start to price higher, so the risk factor is in there. You've got the contingencies, you've got the variations, you've got different things which can things. For instance, if you're doing, especially in things like demolition, you break through a wall, you don't know whether there's a pipe there, you don't you know, there's so many different things which happens, and that comes through experience I guess, of making the mistakes of going through the wall into the pipes, things like that. So, yes, it's that really.
And so how do you so what for you, what's like a perfect job to be able to price? So say I come to you with a project, and as I was saying before, if I gave you planning drawings, it's, for me, I don't think that's enough information. What for you is, how do you want a client to approach you? How can a client best prepare themselves to get the best job, the best contractor, and the best price from, say, someone like yourself?
I think it takes time. The client needs to do their homework.
Yeah.
And I always say that just begin with the end in mind. If they visualize what they actually wanting at the end, because the contractor is doing behind the scenes. They're doing the things which you don't see, and it's the things at the end which the client sees. For instance, the skirting boards, the colours, the coding, how the rooms feel, especially in domestic, the kitchen and the bathroom is the two most important rooms, and it's those rooms which they need to think about what they're actually wanting. Most of my clients, I tend to get them to buy the items which they want fitting, especially kitchens and bathrooms, so that they can get the feel of how much things cost. They can get the feel of the quality and the texture and what the finish would be, colour coding, things like that.
So they actually buy those items themselves and then
Yes.
bring them on site or get them delivered, and you would.
We would then give them a price to fit it. That tends to work really well. So they are involved in the finish of it. When it comes to the main, for instance, we're doing loft conversions and things like that. I don't want really them involved in so much of the structural work and the steels and the things which really it's down to the building control to be checking and keeping track of that quality. That to me is something which I find that the contractor would like to just have a run at and do that part of it. Then the finish, the client gets involved more.
Yes, so they're kind of in control of the feel and the surfaces and
Yes.
that kind of the interior aspects of the jobs.
Yes, I think that works really well, especially these days. We how people are wanting their properties to be finished.
Yeah.
Really. So,
And so from working with someone like myself, like an architect, what are the kind of, so I know now, like what are the sort of do's and don'ts? What makes your life easier? What makes your life difficult?
I think we in the past I've done quite a few projects with architects' drawings which do not work,
Yes.
and it's typically architects and builders that we need to have a good relationship, because you're guiding us as the contractors or the builders in terms of what needs to be done. However, there's been many a times, and for instance, we're just finishing a loft conversion, and there's been maybe 6 or 7 what we've travelled along the architect's thinking, which does not actually work in practical terms. And I find that sometimes it's crucial bits like the stairs, the head heights, the things like that, whereas on the computer it may work, but in reality, when the work is being executed, it's not possible to create that particular outcome.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of area is typically a lot of details on, because I've done projects in the past where an architect would give their clients certain prices, and sometimes the prices vary. For instance, the client might just want a basic drawing. So if the basic drawing is what is given to the contractor to do the work, the contractor's got to then do more work in terms of to execute the work, in terms of the measurements and things like that, the opening. And we would be backwards and forwards with the client, how on sizes and different things to do with the building control.
Yeah.
Where if everything is working well, whereas the building control and experienced architect, everything just flows really well. And it's because I think once you get a relationship with an architect as a contractor, you know how he works.
Yeah.
You tend to then can do the jobs easier and better,
Yeah.
because you know those details will be on there. and that's what I find.
That's interesting. It's like, I mean, yeah, I know what it's like to make those kind of mistakes with a staircase, particularly because when you're on the computer and you're drawing it and you're looking at it in one angle, particularly staircases that move,
Yes.
perhaps it's very easy to overlook. Actually, when you get onto that step, we need a little bit more
Yes.
head height, and when you're on site, it's so obvious.
Yes.
And in the drawings, it's it's kind of a little bit abstracted. So that developing that relationship with a contractor is essential, because you start knowing, how I'm working. I can start seeing how you're working, and obviously from an architect's perspective, I always find it massively useful. The more time I can spend on site, I can see how I've started to draw something, and I might not have considered. Actually, how are you going to get your fingers in to tighten that bolt, or something like that?
Yes, absolutely.
And then so how do these kinds of when an architect comes to you with a project, what type of information do you like to have from them? What kind of lowers the risk and makes it a good project?
I think lots of details, and even down to the type of client, because if we're at the end of the day, we're both working for the client, and I like to build that relationship with the client and get to know them a bit, and even down to what we tend to do when we get a client calling our office and asking for a quote. We tend to ask them things like, I think there's 7 or 8 questions which I tend to ask them.
Yeah.
Why are we having the work done? Generally things like their budget, what their thinking is, and those questions, first of all, make it easier for you to work with them, because you know already that it could be a client who's wanting to downgrade and then retire, or it could be a young couple. We once did 3, which was amazing, 3 chimneys in a row for pregnant women. And it was absolutely amazing. And what they was wanting is the chimney breast removed in the bedroom, so the cot could go where the chimney breast was.
Okay.
And I thought that was such a great thing. However, working for a pregnant woman can be a challenge at times, with the hormones and things like that. So I had to then actually really work on my character throughout those incidents, and it was it was a really testing time, Ryan. But anyway, that was. So it's basically getting to know the client really and utterly. It's that really, and then the working with the architects is basically getting to know them as well, because just to make a phone call and you tend to. I tend to find a lot of architects are very busy, or they don't necessarily want to build a relationship with a builder unless they're going to be, if there's an ongoing financial benefit in terms of they're working on projects after projects after project.
Yeah.
That tends to be the case. But I think those things, my position now as the builder, what I am, I think that is really important to me now.
And it's interesting that there was, this kind of relation, like having a whole, like a turnkey system, if you like, or a kind of, the client comes to an architect and they've got their whole team in place. Often I find one of the problems with projects is that you're always rebuilding a team.
Yes.
You're always putting together a new team. It's always a new sets of contractors, or the client might come to me and they're like, actually, we've got a builder who we want, and which is fine, and I can produce drawings, but I have my preferred people that I would like to be working with.
Yes.
And so what are your sort of thoughts on that from a client perspective? What could you advise a client to sort of be looking for, or for them to be creating a team?
I think if the client is spoken some clients go directly to the builder, some clients go to the architect to get the builder, and some clients that vary and tend to. We're doing a project at the moment for a client who's literally doing it himself, and that's another challenge, because he's not got the experience, but he's wanting to save money and get involved himself, so you tend to have to be guiding him for free. And it takes a lot of your time, so I think I think if the client, and it also depends what job it is as well. If it's things like extensions, renovations, there's a way which they actually, most people do it, where they find an architect, and the architect will do the planning and building control and control everything. And I think that tends to work well.
Yeah.
So that you've got the trust. When the architect then refers or as a builder, and they've worked with for a while, it tends to build a lot of trust straight away. And that's why I think I think over the last year or so, I've been focusing on architects, forward-thinking architects, as being my client, not the real client who's paying the money. So I'm wanting the architect to refer us as builders for that particular project.
Yeah.
And that works really well.
Yeah, well, that's really good to know, particularly from a client's perspective. That kind of advice to when you're looking for starting a building project, to kind of see if you can find architects who have got teams and preferred builders in place.
Yes.
Because there's often a risk of trying to force a team together.
Yes.
Who haven't worked together before.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You need to know each other's feelings, and where there's a kind of give and take. And when things go wrong, are you pointing the finger at each other, or is it a matter of saying, this is a challenge, let's get this done together? And I think that is really and utterly where I'm at now in my business, is building that relationship where you tend to can get, once you build the relationship and you've got your team as a builder, you can then it adds a lot more confidence. So you can actually then take on maybe larger projects or more difficult projects, because you've got everything in place. You've got people for the steels, people for your timber, you've got people for trades, you've got people when things go wrong, all these things. And then you've got your architect as well, which you've got a great relationship with. And I think that to me is very, very important now.
Yeah, and ultimately, when you get that as a package from a client's perspective, that will be it will just reduce that risk, and also you're going to be able to get more cost certainty from earlier on in the project.
Yes.
Well, I say this is going to cost X amount, and I can go and speak with Hylton, and you can be like, yep, that's in the right ballpark, and we've got the experience of having done that a few times. It will work.
Yes.
And in your experience, what have caused cost overruns? Because this is like every client's fear, is that a job starts on site, something happens, something totally unexpected. I always get clients to prepare at least 10% of the fee, of the construction fee, as a contingency.
Yes.
Ideally, you can even have as much as 15, 25%.
Yes.
Particularly if you're working on, if I'm doing a project on a listed old building that's 300 years old, and, everything is an old stone that you just don't know what's going to happen when you start digging holes.
Yes.
From your experience, what are the mistakes that cause cost overruns from a client's perspective?
I think a lot of projects tend to you would naturally have a contingency in there, whether it's like you're saying 10% or 5% or 15%, depending on what type of job it is. I think the client needs to be aware of that, and also if the client's changing their minds a lot. I've had clients in the past where they don't know what they want really.
Mm.
They get to one junction and they're saying, okay, well, no, I want the wall here now, I want this here, there, over there, and then you're changing it, and you've got to then pay your guys to move that, and it takes a few more days. Where does that funding go?
Yeah.
You know, where does the money go from? I think that's on a client's perspective. They need to know when they change their minds, or there's a lot of variations, that is going to cost more money.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why I always like them to buy, especially the items at the end, so that it's more or less within their budget of what they've allocated for that. So we would actually say to them, okay, if we're doing a project for them, we would put the basic items in your property. If you're wanting chrome light switches and chrome this and that, obviously there's a cost difference.
Mm.
And I think then it's about having that awareness of that.
Yeah.
Because I think as I'm becoming more and more of a better builder, your paperwork is vital, as in your contracts, and get them to read them. We do some stuff where I do a lot of videos now on YouTube.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of information for different ways of actually doing different work. So the internet nowadays, the clients are more or less more intelligent than as the builder. Apart from doing the work physically, they know what this is, they know what that is. I've had in the past clients who, looking at the contract, the contract needs to plaster it this way, and I've seen it on the internet, and things like that, and it becomes very much, it's a similar thing to the way how the world's changing, where you go and buy a motor vehicle nowadays, and the person knows just as much as the salesman about that particular vehicle because of the information which is around us. But it's how that information is used in the relationship. Obviously, if we are executing an extension or loft conversion, there's a cost factor in that, and then the client needs to know that if things change, if they decide to change their mind and say this, that, there's a cost in that.
Yeah.
And that comes through the contracts and understanding.
Yeah. No, that's interesting from my perspective as well. Working with clients, I try and get them to do their mind changing on paper first.
Right.
Because obviously, as soon as you go onto site, I mean, it's a lot cheaper for a client for us to move a wall on a drawing than it is once we've already built it.
Yes.
And that's and I think sometimes there isn't really that space to kind of start building something and be like, actually, you know what? I mean, I'd love for it to be like that. Actually, you know what? It's just not working. Let's change it and let's put that wall there. Sometimes that does happen.
Yes.
But the more decisions can be sort of pinned down as much as possible on paper first, and have that rigorous design process where you're testing ideas, makes it a lot easier for the contractor, and it stops these kinds of wild overruns in projects.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things which is working really well from one of my a friend of mine who does kitchens.
Yeah.
And he does virtual reality. He's got kind of virtual reality software.
Right.
Where
Okay.
you can have you put the glasses on and they can actually more or less see the end result through that software, which works really, really well. I've been told he's actually increased a lot of his business through doing that. The software itself is getting better clients, or clients who know that you can actually see the finished result before you even start, which is amazing nowadays. The technology is moving in that direction. Yeah, no,
it's quite incredible the kind of level of reality that you can synthesize on the computer these days.
Yes, because if you think about typically looking at a set of architects' drawings, to some people it just looks like a series of lines, but if it's more or less visualized in the end result, you know, you can not visualize, but through a computer system. I think that works really well, and maybe that's the way how things are going to go eventually.
Great.
Maybe that's an idea for you,
Yeah.
Ryan.
Well, maybe I'll take that on. Yeah. Visual virtual reality for clients.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hylton. I think that's been really, really useful, and some great insights there about how to cost projects and what causes overruns in building work. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Welcome, Ryan. You're welcome.